Judaism and festivals. They seem to have something on festivals every year on the paper. I'm just going to give you an overview of festivals for Judaism, and I'll do separate topics on each festival, but this is just an overview, bird's eye view of it. Festivals, we're not talking Shabbat for festivals because that happens every week, whereas you think about it, a festival is something big, it'll happen once a year. So there are several festivals that the exam board want us to focus on. Rosh Hashanah is effectively the Jewish New Year. It's linked to the holiest day of the Jewish year, which is Yom Kippur. And they're linked by 10 days of awe, A-W-E. And of those 10 days of awe, Rosh Hashanah takes the first 2 days, and it's a festival because they celebrate a new year, even though it's in the autumn. And they celebrate their relationship with God and with others. So they look to see, what have we done wrong? How can we make things better? And they make things right between themselves, between others, and with God. And that's all done through prayer and acts of charity. But we look at that in a specific video on that. Then that starts the 10 days of awe, and it ends with Yom Kippur, the holiest day for the Jews, where they believe God will write their fate for the year ahead, if it's going to be a good year or not such a good year, and that God will close the book of life on that day. So they've got to make sure they're really squeaky clean on that day, and they've made themselves right with God and with others. And that's Yom Kippur, and that is a festival. They're celebrating God's mercy and forgiveness for them, and who doesn't need a little bit of mercy? Then you've got Sukkot, S-U-K-K-O-T, and Sukkot or Sukkah is a tent, or some people would call it a tabernacle. And it reminds the Jews, this takes place, by the way, after Yom Kippur. They'll build shelters in their garden or on their balconies or somewhere where they can go and have their meals in for, I think it's a week. It's a week. And it reminds them of a shelter, God's shelter over them when they escaped from Egypt, and when they were going through the wilderness, moving from Egypt to the promised land, to Israel or Canaan. They were building these tents or tabernacles, and it reminds them of God's presence or God's protection over them. So they do that once a year, a festival to remind them of that. And then they'll have 3 different kinds of leaves: a lulav, a willow, and a myrtle, and they'll have it with a fruit, an etrog, and they'll shake it in the synagogue and pray with it, and that's to remind them of 4 different kinds of personality types. And so Sukkot is Jews celebrating a festival that God looked after them, God cared for them, His protection was with them in the wilderness when they're traveling from Egypt to Israel, and presumably they celebrate that God still protects them to this day, as He does us all. And then you've got, in the spring, you've got Passover, and as I always say, we don't pass over this one, and it has 2 meanings. It's the idea that when God rescues the Jews from Egypt, the angel of death passes over the Jewish households so they are kept safe, while the Egyptian households, the firstborn in their households, died. So the Passover, God is protecting the Jews so that they can pass over from slavery to freedom. That's the other meaning of Passover. Moving over, passing over from slavery to freedom. And again, it's a festival, it's a major festival for the Jews because they are celebrating God's protection of them. He's leading them out from slavery into protection, and the whole idea of being given their own land and starting their own nation, you know, after they get freedom. So it's a big deal, it's a big festival. Shavuot, which comes after Passover, and that celebrates the Torah. God gave them the Torah, where? On Mount Sinai. He always rises to the occasion. Get it? Rises? Okay. Anyway, the Torah. And the Jews have all their rules, and they have their prayers, and they have their way of life all outlined in the Torah. It's God's guidance for them. And so they celebrate that with Shavuot over 2 days, and that is done in spring after Passover. So the festivals you need to know for the exam are Rosh Hashanah, Jewish New Year, in the autumn, followed by Yom Kippur, which marks the end of the 10 days of awe. And then after Yom Kippur, you've got Sukkot, which celebrates the Sukkah or the Sukkah, which are the tents, the tabernacles they built for themselves in the wilderness where God was protecting them, the whole idea of protection, the Sukkahs. And then you've got in the springtime, many months later, Passover, the celebration of the Jews getting their freedom from slavery and moving into their own promised land with their own new society. And then shortly after Passover, you've got Shavuot, celebrating God giving them the Torah. Okay, so festivals, they make up a faith, don't they? They celebrate high points in a faith, and for Jews, the 5 we have to remember are, once again, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot, in that particular order. And now I'm going off to celebrate. Not really, I'm going off to turn off the camera.